Welcome everybody to this webinar today, which is a preview of the new UW Green Building Standard. I'm Lisa Dulude. I'm the UW Director of Sustainability, and really want to thank you for joining me today to learn a little bit about what our new Green Building Standard for UW will look like. This webinar is part of a series of webinars that our office has been hosting across over the year, and it's a webinar series about building a sustainable campus. So this webinar will be recorded. It will be available on our website after the event today, and I'd also encourage you to go and check out some of the other webinars that we've hosted each month over the year. Along with campus partners, we've done webinars on decarbonization, on waste reduction and recycling, sustainability in food with housing and food services. So there's just lots of great content, and really encourage you to check it out. And we've got 2 more webinars left in the series after this one. So next Wednesday, May 15th, you can join us for part 2 of the air travel discussion, how we can address air travel emissions here at UW. And then May 22nd, we will have a State of Sustainability webinar that I'll give, which sort of provides an overview of some of our big sustainability initiatives, particularly initiatives that our office is helping to lead and facilitate, and what's in store for the coming year. So with that, I will get going here. So before we get started, I did just want to take a minute to introduce our UW sustainability team. So I like to say that we have a small but a mighty office, which is very true. We've got a fantastic team, including 2 relatively new members, Danny Arguetti, who's our new CSF, Campus Sustainability Fund Program Director, and Lauren Schultz, who's one of our new Sustainability Planning and Policy Specialists. And we also have a great group of interns. Our office does a wide variety of work under the sustainability umbrella. So we really like to think of ourselves as a hub connecting a lot of different spokes across our tri-campus and larger UW community, really trying to scale up and accelerate sustainability as it relates to campus operations, as well as research, academics, and learning, and really building greater understanding and partnership to create a more sustainable UW. So that's in a nutshell what we do. We do that through a variety of strategic planning, through our strategic action plan, through greenhouse gas emissions and accounting, through policies and programs. And one of those examples is what we're going to be talking about today. So our new UW Green Building Standard. I'm also going to encourage you, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. I'm going to address and take questions at the end, but feel free to enter them in there while I go, just so they don't drop off your radar. So I want to start with the development of the Green Building Standard, or GBS. So this is an effort that we have been working on over the last year plus, with O'Brien 360, UW's green building consultant. O'Brien 360 has been working with UW for the better part of 8 years, I want to say, as a lead consultant, green building consultant, and is really familiar with UW projects in the UW Tri-Campus. We also started, when we began this effort, we started with the University of British Columbia's Green Building Action Plan and their standard as a framework or a starting place for our own. We did a lot of research on our own internally, and also a bunch of research with O'Brien 360 to really identify some good models to start from, and go from there and tweak it to meet the needs of UW and align with different plans and policies in Washington State and City of Seattle, et cetera. And then we've also done this in partnership with stakeholders and partners across our UW community. So I'm not going to call out each individual, but really just want to thank folks from the faculty, in particular, from the College of Built Environments and UW Engineering, as well as the Carbon Leadership Forum, for all of your expertise and assistance. Our UW project managers and staff from facilities in particular, as well as folks from our UW Bothell and Tacoma campuses, staff from medicine, housing and food services, and athletics, and then representatives and partners from two tri-campus advisory committees and action committees that we facilitate. So the Environmental Stewardship Committee and the Executive Committee for the Sustainability Action Plan. We have convened all of these different stakeholders through sort of a large green building committee to get their input and expertise. We've also convened subject matter experts in focus group meetings to dive into details around energy, waste, embodied carbon, site development, et cetera. And so it's through all of these partnerships and the great expertise that we have here at UW, and also through our third party and private sector folks, that we've been able to develop this green building standard. So before I dive into the content of the green building standard, I want to just take a moment to talk about why this is important. Chances are many of you are already aware of why this is important, but I think it's always important to set that framework. And I'm just going to start with the urgency of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We know that the planet is warming. We know that temperatures are increasing and continue to do so year over year. And so this is some data from NOAA. Each of these small gray lines represents 1 year between 1982 and 2022. And you can see those, the trend in temperature increases over time. Oops, excuse me. This dashed line, the black dashed line, represents the mean temperature from 1982 to 2011. The orange line is last year, 2023, so considerably higher. And the black line is 2024 and where we are today. And so we know that things are really not getting any better as far as global warming, and it really underscores the need for the University of Washington to take action. We all have a role to play in this, and particularly UW and higher ed can really have an impact with the action that we take and our global influence and reach. There's also, I'm not going to go through all of the different impacts that we know are occurring because of global warming and climate change, but water is another big piece of that. So this is a recent news release from the Washington State Department of Ecology declaring that we're in a statewide drought, which you can see in that map here. And those are impacts that we're going to continue to see. Water is going to become a scarce resource more and more as we see the impacts of temperature increases, hotter, longer, drier summers. And we're dependent on water, obviously, for drinking, for water and irrigation and agriculture, and for electricity, since much of the state uses hydropower for its electricity. So these are all things that we can address, and we'll talk about that we are taking action on with the new green building standard. Some of the benefits of green building, I'll go through really quickly. Through this green building standard, we're able to help reduce energy and water consumption, as I already mentioned. We can create buildings that support health and well-being and feel welcoming for our occupants. And we spend a lot of time teaching and learning and working in our buildings across the tri-campus and even some outlying facilities across the state. So that's really important. We can reduce greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted both through the construction of buildings, the renovation, and the operation of those buildings. And we have the opportunity to improve habitat through how we manage the grounds and the landscaping, site development, and even through the building itself. And I'll talk a little bit about bird-friendly guidelines, which is one new addition or feature of this latest version of the GBS. And lastly, increased resilience to climate change. So where we used to be able to have passive cooling in the Pacific Northwest, because we didn't really get these really hot, excessively hot summers, that's changing. And we're seeing much more of a need for cooling, not only to keep our building occupants comfortable so that students can learn, teachers can teach, staff can work in a comfortable environment, but we're also seeing periods of wildfire smoke. And so we need to close those windows and have good indoor air quality. And so that's a reality that we need to start thinking about with our buildings and taking action on as well. So how does the green building standard and construction and renovation of buildings fit into the picture of emissions at UW? So our office recently published a 2022 greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the first one that we'd really done holistically since 2005. And 64% of our emissions come from goods and services purchased. This is the first time that UW has inventoried goods and services purchased. And if we break that into a chunk for construction-related purchases account for about 7% of our UW emissions. So we're taking a lot of action, and we have a lot of initiatives to address some of these other larger areas, like the roughly 18% for fossil fuel consumption, as well as air travel and commuting. But construction, you can see, relative to some of these other large sources of emissions, is considerable. And again, just reinforces the need for a strong green building standard. And it's something that UW arguably has a lot of control and influence over. Okay, so we'll dive in here to what the current green building standard looks like, and then changes that we'll be introducing here shortly when the new GBS is published later this spring. So the old or current green building standard really it just has one project type. So it's new construction and major renovation, which is great, and I think been a really valuable, important starting place for UW. And we also kept the targets pretty simple. So water requirements were 50% below code. Operating energy is 15% below code, and there's a LEED Gold certification requirement for buildings. What we have found with the old green building standard is that achieving that water target is often very difficult to achieve because of local codes already being pretty assertive as far as water conservation. And as far as energy, we've found that this standard doesn't align well with some of the recent changes to state and city regulations that are really pushing for more of a carbon-based code, which means that they're trying to push and are pushing commercial buildings across the state to get off of fossil fuels and electrify your buildings and get to a clean energy source for heating and hot water in particular, while still trying to have an emphasis on energy efficiency and reducing waste in terms of energy consumption. So what does the new green building standard look like? You'll see that there's, instead of one category for project type, we now have 4. So we do a lot of renovation and construction, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute at the University of Washington. And there's plans to really do even more because we have a lot of building stock and a lot of buildings that are still structurally very sound, but there's improvements that need to be made. That said, there's also some buildings that are really at the end of their useful life and need to come down. But we wanted to make sure that the green building standard addresses those tier 2 project types. We also have a new tier 3 project type. So that's really addresses system upgrades to energy and water consuming equipment and HVAC systems. And then a 4th project tier, which is addressing non-energy projects. So much more cosmetic improvements to the space. In terms of targets, I'll go through quickly. We will, or somewhat quickly, and provide a high-level overview. Once the GBS is published, there's a much more in-depth document that you all can check out if you really want to get into the weeds on these different targets and their applicability by project type. So the water target is 25 to 40% below code, depending on the project tier. Energy or energy use intensity, there's a requirement to be below the state requirement, which is applicable to the vast majority of our buildings already. LEED Gold certification or equivalent. And the next piece on embodied carbon is a new feature and pretty exciting. And I'll talk about that a little more here in a minute as well. But we have a 500 kilogram CO2 equivalent per meter squared target for primary materials, so mostly structural materials for building construction. And then I also want to point out a few additional targets that we have, features that we have with these new targets. So with the LEED Gold certification, we also have a UW LEED scorecard that has some required credits above and beyond the LEED prerequisites. In terms of ecology, the new Green Building Standard has a new UW bird-friendly guideline that was created by a PhD student. So we have a great group here of experts that we relied on to help us develop some guidelines to reduce bird collisions and bird deaths with our buildings, which is actually a pretty big issue. In terms of health and wellness for building occupants, the new guidelines ask projects to pilot a Fitwel credit. And it also includes a provision for showers and changing facilities to help ensure that people have a place to clean up if they're bike commuting to work, or just trying to get more exercise in during their workday. And then as far as equity, there is a requirement for lactation facilities and gender neutral restrooms, again, largely for Tier 1 and Tier 2 projects. And three other features that I don't want to skip that are important are, they're bulleted at the bottom. So no new fossil fuels. So the vast majority of our tri-campus right now does burn fossil fuels for heat and hot water. So we are working, that's part of sort of a separate but related initiative to transition our buildings off of fossil fuels and electrify our systems. But if you are building a new facility, for example, the new GBS would not allow you to have burn fossil fuels as the primary source of heat, for example. We're also requiring a life cycle cost assessment. I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in a second in a separate slide and what that means. And then we're also requiring that buildings connect to the district energy system. So here at the Seattle campus in particular, we have a district energy system that supplies heating and hot water to the majority of campus. And there's a lot of efficiencies gained through that central system, as opposed to having individual heating systems at our 167 buildings across the Seattle campus. There's efficiencies not only in terms of energy, water, and emissions reduction, but also efficiencies in terms of operation and maintenance, and time and financial savings to the university by centralizing those systems where we can. Okay, so I wanted to go a little more in depth on one of the new features, the life cycle cost assessment, or analysis, LCCA. So this is a tool that helps UW determine what's the most cost-effective option or options by evaluating both the purchase cost or the upfront cost of a building, of systems and components of a building, as well as the maintenance and operating costs. And what this does is it really helps ensure that we are making informed decisions, and decisions that will be both environmentally sound and financially sound for the university over the course of the lifetime of that building and or that asset. So in many cases, this is already required by the state for projects over certain thresholds, but not necessarily for projects that are below those thresholds. Some of the smaller renovation projects, when we buy HVAC system equipment, for example. And so by making this part of our standard process, we're really just making sure that we're aligning with industry best practices and doing really good analysis up front. So the LCCA tools that we're requiring folks to use are the state tools that we've already been using for many years. We're just increasing the scope of projects that will need to do this analysis. And those tools help us assess the total amount of energy that would be consumed and water consumed, as well as emissions generated from a baseline scenario against two or more alternatives. So it's a really great tool. Again, something that UW already does a great job with. This just helps ensure that we're covering all our bases for a wider variety of projects. So I mentioned another new exciting feature, that we have an embodied carbon target now. For those that aren't familiar, embodied carbon is the emissions associated with extracting the raw materials. Say if we're talking about steel, extracting the raw materials, transporting those materials to a manufacturing facility, manufacturing that product, transporting it to a job site, and installing it in the building. And so those materials, we know, have a really high impact when it comes to global warming. The Carbon Leadership Forum, which is a research arm here at UW and does fantastic work, has put out a lot of research to show that embodied carbon will be responsible for almost half of total new construction emissions between now and 2050. So when we compare that against operational emissions, so fossil fuels that we're burning to provide heat and hot water day in and day out for a building, embodied carbon emissions are right up there with operational emissions, and they're emissions that are out there today. They've already been extracted, manufactured, and put into a building. So arguably equally as important to address, which is why that we're doing that and including it in our green building standard. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is just a few examples of how we're already doing this at UW with some recent buildings. So I'm going to give a few examples of the Health Sciences Education Building, Founders Hall, and the Hans Rosling Center for Population Health, all of which are relatively new here at the Seattle campus. So I also want to share some of the lessons learned in some of these buildings. So I'm going to share a whole building analysis completed by Miller Hull, one of the architect for the Health Sciences Education Building. So this analysis really looked at embodied carbon and different options relative to embodied carbon for this building. And what you'll notice here is the first column with the red bars is global warming potential or emissions, embodied emissions. The second column in gray is the total mass of those products for that building. So the steel, the item listed number 1 there, has the highest global warming potential, but it's only 8.4% of the total mass. So look at that compared to number 2, cast in place concrete, slightly less in terms of emissions and global warming potential, but 38.1% of total mass for primary materials for this building. And perhaps one of the things that is most interesting, or at least I found really interesting, was number 3. So extruded polystyrene or styrofoam was planned to be used for insulation purposes in the basement of that building. The third largest source of emissions, but only 0.1% of the total mass. So this analysis was really, really valuable and really eye-opening, and just shows the importance of looking at these emissions. The total mass or the total amount of material doesn't necessarily correspond with what you'd think the emissions would be for that material, the embodied emissions. This is another part of the analysis that I just wanted to highlight for Miller Hull, where they looked at the wall assembly of the buildings, and they actually picked a fiber cement option for the exterior because it was one of the options that had low emissions, and it also met the project requirements for aesthetics, schedule, and cost. And then over on the right, I really just wanted to highlight that as a result of this analysis for the Health Sciences Education Building, the decisions made with materials, so using that fiber cement as well as cross laminate timber for the floors, reduce the emissions by roughly 20% for this project. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about cross laminate timber with this next example. So with Founders Hall, this is a building that was completed through the Foster School of Business, I want to say about 2 years ago. And it was designed to be a very sustainable building. They used CLT or cross laminate timber, as you can see in the picture here, both for structural purposes, as well as for some of the floor decking. And that resulted in a approximately 76% reduction in cumulative carbon emissions. It also, I think, adds value in ways that may be less difficult to quantify. It adds a lot of warmth and beauty to the building, you know, compared to steel and concrete, which can feel colder and less warm and inviting. Additional components or features of this building is that it used 70%, designed to use 70% less energy in terms of its operational energy and 53% less water when compared to sort of your conventional option and materials. So another real success story of where UW has pushed the envelope above and beyond what the old green building standard required. And lastly, wanted to just highlight some features from the Hans Rosling Center for Population Health. So this building received LEED Platinum certification, which is above LEED Gold. Also achieved really high energy efficiency, uses rainwater collection to flush toilets so that we're not using potable, drinkable water to flush toilets. It has shading fins on the east and west facades of the building, which help reduces solar gain, which in turn helps to reduce the need for mechanical cooling during those summer months. Addresses improved accessibility and mobility throughout the site and the building. Has some really nice design elements that promote human health. Encourage you to go check it out if you haven't seen it yet. And gender neutral restrooms. So again, another nice example of a really holistic approach to green and sustainable buildings. Again, these are three examples that went above and beyond the existing code. And I think it just shows how much we have learned, how much the industry has learned, and that we're really recognizing a need to meet these higher standards because of the urgency around climate change and sustainability as it relates to commercial buildings and construction. So this I wanted to address as well. So I mentioned earlier that we added 3 additional project tiers in terms of project types to this new green building standard. Tier 2 is really about renovation and renewal. And UW has a new tri-campus initiative called the Campus Asset Renewal Program, or CARP. And underneath that are 2 components, one around building renewal, and the other around energy renewal. And I think the exciting thing with this new green building standard is that there's a lot of synergy and a lot of opportunity as we go forward and really renovate the existing building stock to make improvements that not only add value for students and faculty and staff in terms of the quality and the experience they'll have in that building, but also ensuring that it will be done more sustainably so that we can reduce embodied emissions, we can address water conservation and operational energy as we go in and renovate and look for opportunities to get off of fossil fuels across our different campuses and facilities. Part of a focus of the Campus Asset Renewal Program is no new net square footage. Facilities has done a lot of research to show that we really have all of the square footage that we need. Some of the buildings on campus are at the end of their useful life and need to come down. So this isn't to say that we won't build new buildings or won't build a new building if it's needed. But there's a huge opportunity to restore and renew the buildings that we have and utilize that space. And that's also one of the best ways to minimize emissions, as we've already talked about. So a great opportunity there. Okay. So when it comes to applicability, so this green building standard, I'd say in terms of the content is 90% of the way to the finish line. We're aiming to publish this by June 30th of this year. The applicability is sort of the last piece that we're figuring out and still in draft form, but this is what it looks like today. So this green building standard would apply to UW capital projects and public work in the state of Washington. So this wouldn't apply to some of the buildings that we own in Rome, for example. It applies to all of the campuses, the different facilities, departments, and units across the organization. And it's for buildings and facilities that are owned and operated by UW. And this is by and large, the vast majority of, in terms of buildings and facilities that we own, the vast majority of projects. So roughly 90% of our projects are buildings that we own and operate. Is still under development and will likely be a phase 2 rollout is looking at different lease types that UW has, different ownership and development agreements. We're still sort of gathering data and learning a little bit more about those projects. And so we'll be determining later, like I said, probably a phase 2 rollout, if the GBS will apply to those types of projects. And then lastly, once the new GBS is finalized and published, it will apply to projects that have not yet completed project formation, which is defined with our campus architecture and planning group. So if your project is already in pre-design or design when this is published, you won't need to retroactively comply or anything like that. Okay. So, the next step. So once we get this, the content finalized and published, which we expect to do in the next month and a half to 2 months, that's great. And then we also recognize that we have a lot of work to do as far as rollout and implementation to make sure that this is successful. We've already begun a soft launch with several projects: Haggett Hall, Anderson Hall, ASUW Shell House, and T-Wing. Those last 3 are renovation projects, one of which is a historic building. Haggett Hall is housing, student housing. And so we've been able to really learn a lot with our project teams, both internally and then the design build teams that are working on these, and really had great success with the soft launch thus far. And so the next steps as we roll this out will be education, training, and tools. And I'll show you a few examples of what we're working on right now, but we'll also be really looking to a wide variety of our subject matter experts and project managers to make sure that we're meeting everyone's needs to roll this out successfully. So this is an example of a quick reference guide that Marilyn on our team has created. And it's just a snapshot for what this might look like for water, energy, and embodied carbon, really to help project managers and design teams, departments and units understand what would be required sort of at a glance with the new GBS. And then has pointers. You can follow the different colored lines correspond to the project tier. And then we have different pointers down at the bottom of where you could visit the Word document, the new Green Building Standard Word document, for more detail. We have also started thinking about process integration and really want to emphasize early engagement and make sure that project teams are thinking about this early. So when we think about planning and site selection, budgeting for your project, project initiation, and making sure that owners' project requirements are in alignment with the new GBS. We're going to be working with our project delivery group and campus architecture and planning, engineering services, a bunch of other units to really make sure that all of our planning and processes for these types of projects are as sort of aligned and integrated as they can be from the get-go. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I do want to save time for questions. Before I do that, I wanted to make sure that if you're interested, we focused on the Green Building Standard today. If you're interested in learning more about some of the other ways that UW is addressing sustainability and climate change, there's a few resources that I wanted to point you to. So one is our 2022 greenhouse gas emissions inventory that I mentioned. We have a full report and a preview webinar that you can watch on our website. And as I mentioned, it's the first time UW has ever included goods and services purchased in our inventory. We also are doing, have a huge initiative, and it's a priority for the university to get the Seattle campus steam plant off of fossil fuels. So encourage you to visit our energy transformation website, which has an outline of the 5-part strategy to do that, as well as a lot more information on the progress of that initiative. A decarbonization town hall that we partnered on with the Faculty Senate back in the fall to talk about our goals, particularly for the steam plant and for direct emissions reduction. A new draft proposal that our Environmental Stewardship Committee is working in partnership with the university on to address emissions from air travel. And then this fall, we are going to be kicking off a 1.5 long effort to update and revise and really create a new sustainability action plan. So encourage you all to sign up for our sustainability newsletter and some of our other blog posts so that you can stay informed and get engaged where you want to be. Okay. And this, and like I said, this webinar will be is being recorded and available after this session. So with that, I really want to thank you for joining, and also want to take any questions that you have. And we actually have Elizabeth Powers here with us as well, principal with O'Brien 360. Our prime consultant for the development of this. So Damon, just want to make sure that Elizabeth is able to speak if there's any questions that come up.
Yes, she should be able to unmute herself now if she wants.
So let me take a look at some of the questions we have here. So how many buildings are at the end of its life cycle? When would those be taken down, and when will they be replaced with new construction? So it's a great question. Facilities has done that assessment and actually coded different buildings that need to come down. They're not able to be restored, and done various sort of assessments in terms of their quality. I can't tell you right now how many, but there will be more information coming out from facilities on that. But that's part of the work ahead of us for in terms of budgeting and coordinating all of that building and energy renewal work that needs to happen. Okay, a question here from April. Have there been any discussions about making healthcare hospital spaces a separate project type? That's a great question. That was discussed and thought about with the development of the GBS. And essentially the conclusion we came to is that the requirements wouldn't really differ too much as far as the green building standard for a healthcare or a hospital facility compared to an office environment. There are a few, and Elizabeth could help me find any sort of nuances there, but in general, we didn't find a need to separate by those different space use types with the GBS. There's a few nuances in the actual Word document, but yeah, great question. Okay, let's see some questions here as well. And I also wanted to share, thank you, Elizabeth put in a note here that the Health Sciences Education Building just earned LEED Gold certification as well, which is great. Another question, does UW Sustainability provide a stance or procurement recommendations like lithium batteries as a fossil fuel divestment option? It's a great question. So right now, we don't have specific requirements around procurement. I think because we've just done this 2022 inventory and realized through that inventory that goods and services purchased are the university's largest source of emissions, that will be a big focus for us and is the work ahead of us in the coming years. there's tons of opportunity there. That said, the UW Central Purchasing does have a green procurement webpage, and it has some useful resources on there as far as things that they try to include and do include for sustainable procurement. So I hope that helps answer that question. Okay. Are there lactation rooms and all gender restroom requirements in the GBS more strict than Washington state laws? Elizabeth, you can pop in and correct me if I'm getting this wrong. I don't know that they're more strict, but we are essentially saying that they need to be considered and included for tier 1 projects, so new construction. And again, there is some flexibility in the GBS. If it doesn't make sense for a particular facility, then you could get an exception from that requirement. But we're trying to make sure that that those are generally included where it makes sense for tier 1 and 2 projects.
Yeah, I can comment if you want, Lisa.
Oh, great.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Elizabeth. The university is ahead of the gender neutral restroom requirements that are in the International Building Code. So it's not embedded in Washington state code, but the model codes that are out there, it's slightly more ambitious, I guess would be the right word. So they sort of took the lead. It's probably been 2 or 3 years now, and really developed those standards. So we're just referencing them primarily in the Green Building Standard. Lactation rooms, there are also, I'm not sure if there's if it's included in the state code, and we haven't provided particular requirements for that because they vary a lot. If you go to the UW webpage on lactation rooms, there's lots of different approaches to it, and we're letting the projects determine the best approach for supporting their staff in each project.
Okay, great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, another question. Where can I find that info when it comes out on building renewal and deconstruction coding? I think you're talking about the campus, or you're talking about the campus asset renewal program. I think, yes, okay. That's a great question. I know that facilities is working on getting more information out. And so I guess I would have to say, stay tuned, and we will, and if you're signed up for facilities, UW facilities news, as well as sustainability news, we'll make sure that that we put that in our newsletter and some of our blog posts once it's more publicly available. Okay. What is the plan for keeping the materials that are going to come out of those end-of-life buildings out of the landfill, and hopefully as much as possible still in use and reuse? That's a great question. It's not something that we explicitly address in the new GBS, but it is addressed in LEED certification in terms of the points that you can get. Is that accurate, Elizabeth, or you want to?
Yeah, that's right. And it is one of the required credits is to reduce the amount of materials that go to landfills through either reuse or recycling. And in this region, there's a number of other drivers that support these projects having a fairly high recycling rate from demolition. There certainly could be more work done on reusing materials coming out of these buildings.
Yeah. Yeah, great. And it could be something that as we, with this next iteration, new iteration of the Green Building Standard, it could be something that we look to incorporate, at a higher level into the next version. So great question. Okay. When discussing the UW power plant decarbonization plan with professionals within the industry, I received back skepticism about the feasibility of a hot water system working as a replacement for the steam-driven system. Is there a more detailed plan that I can share? Great question, Mark. Yes, so if you go to UW's sustainability website and then go to energy transformation, there's both a button right on the homepage, as well as if you click on campus and scroll down, we've got the 5-part strategy in there in more detail, and some other information and posters that sort of break out or talk a little bit more about why a hot water system, how it will help, or why it's needed to electrify our system. So we can't keep a steam system in place and then put in heat pumps. We need a hot water system, and it's really you know, what other campuses all across the country are doing. They're moving from a steam to a hot water system, or maybe doing geothermal. So I would say it's definitely a very proven technology. And we will have an engineering baseline report on which goes into much more detail, which I think is what you're asking about, and then here at the end of the summer. So can definitely point you to that. But you and I can chat offline and can give you some more resources as well if you'd like. Okay. Another question is, I'd like to know more about how projects are submitted, tracked, and reviewed. So another great question, and we recognize that that's a really important part of ensuring that the standard gets implemented. So when I talked about the next steps for implementation, that's what we're going to be working with Elizabeth and O'Brien 360 and their team on, as far as how do we make sure that we have the right checks, reviews in place along the different timelines and milestones of a project, from very early on through the, you know, even post-occupancy. So we have a decent idea of what that looks like, but we don't have it all figured out just yet. So that's this phase 2 of work with Elizabeth and her team. But Elizabeth, you could probably add some more specifics about what we're thinking about and what we're looking at as far as successful process implementation.
Sure. We're working with some of those, what did we call them? Pilot projects or trial projects. They will be the first ones where we put together a reporting format, and they'll have, or they've agreed to, future projects will have a requirement to do reporting throughout the project, and it'll line up with the major requirements. So they'll be reporting on energy, water, the LEED scorecard, and then what they're doing on health, equity, and resilience. And then I don't know what it's currently being called, but there is an initiative also that, in addition to all the other things Lisa talked about, to improve and expand monitoring, at least on the Seattle campus, to all of the buildings, so that we would be able to track long-term how they're actually performing after they're turned over to the university. And that is also separate from the Green Building Standard, but will be useful for UW Sustainability to compare to the reporting from the projects.
Yeah, great point. You reminded me too that this is sort of related, separate but related to the Green Building Standard, that Washington State, with the Clean Building Performance Standard mandate, has certain specific energy use intensity targets that our buildings have to meet, as well as emissions reduction targets that we have to meet. And the city of Seattle has similar requirements. And so ensuring that we have a really good tracking and reporting process for the GBS will also be very important, as far as alignment and providing some of the information that we need for those state reporting requirements and meeting those mandates as well. So yeah, great question. Okay, I'm just gonna check and see if we've got any new ones here that I have missed. Any building in particular that seems to have the most negative impact on the environment, especially related to embodied and operational carbon? That I don't know. There definitely are some that are a lot better than others, but I don't, that's not one I feel like I could answer. We'll have to get back to you on that one. Okay, and another question from Rada. Will the energy reporting be available to the public? What about embodied carbon reporting? So excellent question. So UW, as part of our energy and building renewal work, is actively working on getting better building, not only better building data, better building data and analytics, and ways to make that information more available and readily accessible to students and faculty and staff. So that's coming soon. We will also be working on some green building case studies. So essentially, we'd like to have a project summary and case study for all these projects moving forward, both renovation and new construction. So that'll be another way that we're sort of reporting out on how a building was designed and the standards, and how it actually aligned with embodied carbon, operational carbon, and meeting those targets. And I think that's an important part for us to do for accountability as well, accountability and transparency with our buildings. Okay. I don't think I'm seeing any additional questions. So yeah, I think with that, if there's no additional questions, oh, somebody had a question that I maybe have missed. Let me see here. Okay, can you talk more about the health sciences building renovation, not the health sciences education building? Elizabeth, you might be better able to talk about that than I am. I can sort of talk about it in generalities. You want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. I think I'm a little unclear. Do they, both the Hans Rosling Center for Population Health and the Health Sciences building were new?
I think they're talking about maybe what we're planning for just the health sciences buildings in general at the south end of campus.
Okay, yeah. I guess the only example that we have right now is the work that's happening inside T-Wing. There's a whole raft of projects that are part of the capital plan that I don't know the details of what's coming up.
Yeah.
As far as improving and renovating those facilities, but each project will probably fall under tier 2, 3, or 4, and then have the associated requirements. So more robust multi-floor systems and all the finishes. They'll probably do it like a LEED CI certification, and they'll have energy and water requirements. If any of the projects are focused on systems upgrades, they'll have performance requirements, and there'll probably also be a lot of projects, as you said, that are mostly finishes or reconfiguring, demising walls and things like that. And those would fall under the requirements for tier 4.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. I will say in general too, as far as the long-term plan for some of the health sciences buildings, I know that they're, in terms of the information that the facilities department has collected on those buildings in particular, there's some of our buildings that are in the poorest condition. And so I think the plan for many of those facilities is for them to come down at some point in the future and build newer, more modern facilities to replace them. Okay. Let's see. Will there need to be changes to the water and electrical metering systems on campus in order to track performance? Yes. In a nutshell, that's also part of the plan. So we our campus energy utilities and operations unit, in partnership with many other units and facilities, is really working hard and developing a plan to have better building analytics and better data so that we can track and measure, and then ultimately manage building performance even more proactively than we are today. So hopefully that helps. Okay, another question. Is UW Sustainability involved in the next iteration of the Seattle campus master plan? That's a great question, Liz. You know, we so far we're not, but I would imagine, and with the sort of the partnerships across units and facilities, that we will be, and making sure that we're thinking about sustainability with the master plan will be really important, and also aligns with some of the other big initiatives like the building renewal program and energy renewal program. So great question. Okay. Well, we're at the end of our hour here, and I just want to thank you all so much for spending an hour to talk about green buildings. Thanks for your interest, and be on the lookout in the next month or so for the new GBS. And please reach out to myself. We'll also have Elizabeth and O'Brien and company on for this second phase of rollout and implementation, and really want to make sure that if any of you have questions, you know that you can contact us for assistance. So thanks again, take care, and we'll talk to you soon.